Next day, but most of us get a break. Today we are going to talk about the Bertoia Bushes, just like this beautiful little piece, which happens to be gold plated, and we'll get into detail more later. And I want to just start the day off with a little bit of sound. I hope you can hear that. Those are a couple of gongs and the singing bars. Well, let me get comfortable here. First of all, I will tell you the background of the inspiration for the Bertoia Bushes, which, by the way, are some of my favorite pieces. I just love them. We lived out in the country. Harry spent the majority of his career in Pennsylvania on a country setting where he managed to accumulate about 200 acres of land, much of it virgin forest where Native Americans used to live, and just beautiful country. Here's a sampling of what I grew up in and what Harry saw every day. You can see the dogwood tree there. That's me as a little kid running around. And a major influence of his art was nature. We had a pond with turtles and fish and frogs. It was great. So nature was a huge influence, and in fact, he said that was his major influence. Of course, he studied other artists and always purchased the latest art books, but nature was a big one. Also, in 1957, Harry got a fund which enabled him to go to Italy, his home country, for the first time since he had left as a teenager in 1930. So almost 30 years later, he went back to Italy and toured all the cultural sites and had a chance to see the amazing art that is all over Italy and the public fountains. And he also went to his hometown, San Lorenzo, in the Friuli area north of Venice. And the weather was very favorable. It was sunny and beautiful for the couple weeks he was there. And he became so inspired visiting Italy, which, if any of you have been to Italy, you know it's just a gorgeous country. They're clearly having some troubles now with the virus, but normally so beautiful, with beautiful people, friendly, lots of wine drinking and kissing and hugging. So he came back from that trip and he was so full of energy and just bursting that he began to make these sunburst kind of shapes. And so it was really, well, we talked about dandelions last week, and some of those early shapes turned into dandelion forms. And the bushes were a natural extension of that. So it was about 1960 that the bush form really came into being. And I will just read a couple things. We'll intersperse photos with text here. This one really does look like some kind of bush. And then at times he would put a bud in the middle of a bush. In fact, he commented that he loved to look at flowers, but he was almost sad to look at them because he knew that the blossom would fade within a few days. So he was able to capture these blossoms sometimes in the bushes. And I will read a couple things people have said about the bushes. Let's see here. From the, excuse the phone ringing, from the John Willenbecker thesis in 1958, which was still more the dandelion form, but he says, okay, Bertoia began to bring the amorphous clouds of steel wire which he had been making down to earth. Retaining the basically ovoid or spheroid shape, he transformed them in terms of yet other natural phenomena: flowers, trees, and growing plants. The form is obvious. It is that of a living organism, a plant, growing from the ground up in a narrow stem and busting at the top into a golden blossom. Other early pieces were reminiscent of sunflowers with sharp spikes. And, okay, here's something that Harry said in a lecture that he gave at the Aspen Design Festival in 1955. It is desirable to leave the equation somewhat incomplete, thereby giving the observer a chance for completion. And certainly the value of suggestion is not to be underestimated in winning the observer's confidence. Pretty cool. And another thing he said at, let's see, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in 1961. This shows a mere outline near some pine trees and is an arrangement of what may be referred to as flower forms. I don't necessarily mean to say that I'm trying to do this flower or that flower, but simply by using metal as metal sometimes wishes to be used or hints to be used, that such forms come about. I love the way he says that. And here are some really beautiful bushes. Just different samples. And just as there are so many different varieties of bushes in nature, there are just as many varieties of Bertoia bushes. Okay, now there was only one bush that was actually a commissioned bush, because the bushes tended to be on the smaller side. You can see our little golden one here is only about 8 or 10 inches high. So this is not something you would hire for a public building, but there is one here that we'll show you. This one, it's called the Bush World, and it is at the Princeton Princeton University in New Jersey, the Bush Globe, and they simply call it The World, and that was from 1964. And that was about almost 5 feet tall. Now there were some bushes that were that tall, and we're going to get into a little bit of discussion about the construction. And those larger 5-foot bushes could take up to 6 months to make. So really quite an undertaking. Harry was not afraid of hard work. I'll read something that Beverly Twitchell has written in her book, Bertoia, the Metal Worker. She says here, let's see. For about 15 years, the artist occasionally made large, complex pieces using the techniques he had developed for bushes. Because of their techniques and patinas, these are generally categorized as bushes, although they are more abstract and do not mimic nature in form. The expanses of complex surface on the exteriors of works of this type ripple almost rhythmically, full of motion. Making such consistent and undulating surfaces from tiny knobs on small branching rods is a technical tour de force. This transformation of meticulous technique into monumental forms suggests life without explicitly imitating nature. From certain angles, many of these pieces expose unusual interior forms, thereby uncovering their structures and disclosing other secrets. Some bushes are much simpler. Having reached a stage between seedling and sapling, with many buds on the branches, they suggest growth, foliage, perhaps even flowering. The modest works of this type have an appealing vitality and honesty. I'll show you a few more samples here. It's a beautiful, basic bush. Let me get this. Okay, there we go. Now this one you can see has different buds or different tips. They are elongated, quite unusual. And that was just a different construction technique. You know, this I would say is kind of your typical bush with just the rounded buds at the ends there. And here's a sampling of one of the larger pieces. Now this is about 60 inches tall, and this type of bush would have taken a long time to make. We're going to go look. Oh yeah, here's another incredible bush. Just, yeah, the shapes, so organic and really wild. I'm going to take you over to see some of our samplings of bushes here. Let's see if I can get this set up. Oh, sorry. I'm not the... Okay, this is better. All right. Okay. So, you see this bush. Actually, I'm going to see if I can... Okay. This little bush, I figured it out, has about 1,400 separate wires. And you can see the construction. It has a central sphere. Then you've got the initial branch coming out. And Lesta, my sister, who did work at the studio for a couple of summers, described how she would see the beginning stages of these bushes, and she used this great phrase, it looked like a spiky hedgehog, because just the first branch would be constructed, and the remaining part of the branch would come later, and then finally the buds would be the final touch, where he would take some of the welding rod and braze or weld it right on there. And you can see many of these are quite close, and you wonder, well, gosh, wouldn't they just melt together? Now, some of these may not be the original spaces. You know, we can move these a little further apart. That's probably how they were meant to be. He liked to have things fairly evenly spaced. But yeah, the original spiky hedgehog would be the first stage, and of course he had to plan out the spacing and how dense, how concentrated the branches would be, and then do the spiky part, and then make the rest of, well, each section of the branch. Now this one has 3 additional sections, each splitting into 3, kind of a fractal procedure there. I'm going to show you this next, let's see if I can get this right here. Put this one up there. So for this one, okay. Hopefully you can see that okay. All right. Yeah. All right. This bush, you can see it's quite different. We've got, let's see here. These tips, you can see that they are open-tipped. You can actually stick a pencil right in there. So this is a different kind of tip treatment. We've got the usual little rounded buds, and then you saw in that previous photo there was the elongated tips. This one's just open tipped, and once again, let's see, I'm gonna bring the camera over here so you can see the construction a little bit better. All right, hopefully that's okay. See, back in there, here's this huge piece of, I'm not the greatest photographer here. You can see this huge stem, and that's just a piece of copper. Just a nice flat base. But from the stem, again, you can see the first initial branch, that spiky hedgehog, and then all the splitting branches from there. We've had quite the discussions on how these were made. His helpers, Jim and Ed Flanagan, could do the spiky hedgehog part, and oftentimes they would do some of the further branching as well. But Harry himself had to do the final touches of the bushes, especially if they were very dense and concentrated, such as this one, because it just took a master welder to complete those final stages. I apologize for my lack of photography skills. But yeah, and okay, that little one that I said had 1,400 wires. Something like that might take a few weeks to make, but still, you think about that. And back in the day when Harry was selling those, he'd probably sell it for a few $100s. And now something like that could easily go for 30,000. But so a few weeks worth of work for an item that was going to sell for a few $100s, and probably a good portion of that was the supplies, the materials. And then he often would patentate these, this kind of thing. You can see the greenish tint, that's patented with various chemicals. And I love this picture, which was from the Allentown Art Museum. Just all different kinds of bushes. These were all at the 1976 Allentown show. And yeah, the bushes go on and on, all the different types there are. And oh, I see somebody's telling me I need to hold the pictures up higher. Again, I apologize, but hopefully you can see that one. How's that? And I will mention about this little beauty. This was gold-plated, as mentioned, and you can see the stem is basically just a copper pipe, the same kind that you would use in residential plumbing, so nothing real fancy there. And you can see the construction, again, the stem and then the spiky hedgehog. And this was actually given to my sister-in-law, Kylene, who, after she was married to Val, my brother, for about a year, Harry came driving down the road. They lived right next door to us. And he didn't usually stop and visit them unless it was a whole family deal. But he stopped and came in, and he gave this to Kylene for her first anniversary. She cherished it for many years and then donated it to the foundation, which was incredibly generous of her. There are several places around the country, well, more than several, but the ones that I know of off the top of my head are the Brooklyn Museum in New York. Of course, not now when everything's closed, but eventually you'll be able to see bushes there at the Brooklyn Museum. The Kirkland Museum in Denver, Colorado, and they just opened up a new building, beautiful new building, right in the museum section of town. They've got a couple of incredible Bertoia bushes. And the Mayo Clinic, and I believe it is the Rochester, Minnesota one, that has a beautiful bush too. They do say that art has a very healing quality to it, and I think that's true. So that is really the main gist of what I'd like to say about bushes. So we will have one last little treat. Come over here and we'll have some of this. thank you for joining me this morning.